Production of the Panzer II Model F was halted in July 1942. They became the last classical light tanks produced in Germany. But this does not mean that light combat vehicles stopped being produced altogether. The fact is that the Germans continued to build specialized reconnaissance tanks. In their functions, they resembled armored reconnaissance vehicles. They were not even given the usual German term Panzerkampfwagen, which means tank. This article is about German reconnaissance tanks of the wartime period, the Leopard, the Luchs from the company MAN, and a reconnaissance tank based on the Czechoslovak chassis 38T. None of them ever became truly mass-produced. German light tank designers lagged significantly behind the creators of medium tanks when it came to distributing duties among crew members. The first German light tank, the Panzer I, was conceived as a two-man vehicle. All tanks in that family remained like that, including the later C and F modifications. The concept of the three-man Panzer II also remained unchanged. As with the French Renault D1 and Saumur S-35 tanks, the increase in crew size there occurred at the expense of a radio operator who sat in the hull. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and Czechoslovakia, from the mid-1930s, light tanks were being designed and produced with two-man turrets. The Soviet two-man T-60 and T-70 stand apart here. Those tanks appeared as a result of an emergency development of the amphibious reconnaissance tank T-40, which the military viewed skeptically as early as the spring of 1941. As for the Germans, a one-man turret for a light tank was long considered normal. The situation began to change only after the outbreak of the Second World War. Following the combat actions of the 2nd Light Division, one of the two divisions equipped with Panzer II Model D tanks, the idea arose to develop a light reconnaissance tank. The vehicle was given a simple German name, the Single Reconnaissance Vehicle. Such reconnaissance tanks were planned to be included in the composition of tank and light divisions. An official order from the Inspection of Motorized Troops for the Single Reconnaissance Vehicle appeared on the 15th of September, 1939, still before combat operations in Poland had ended. According to the requirements included in the order, the Wehrmacht needed a fully tracked reconnaissance vehicle with high speed and good cross-country capability. As combat in Poland showed, the existing German light tanks in service did not meet these requirements. The order also indicated a preference for the use of rubber metal tracks, which had shown themselves quite well in tests. However, further work showed that such tracks, which performed excellently on half-track tractors, were by no means the best choice for tanks, even light ones. The contract to develop the reconnaissance tank chassis went to the company MAN, while the turret and the turret support and gearbox went to the company Daimler-Benz. The chassis received the designation Fully Tracked Vehicle, 13-ton weight class, first type. According to the specification, the tank, which at that time had a combat weight of about 24,000 pounds, was to reach a maximum speed of 70 kilometers per hour, about 43 miles per hour. Its armor thickness was 30 millimeters, about 1.2 inches, on the front, and 20 millimeters, about 0.8 of an inch, on the sides. The armament consisted of the usual pairing of a 20 millimeter automatic cannon and an MG-34 machine gun. The difference was that the 20 millimeter tank gun received not a shortened but a full-length barrel from the 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. This allowed a slight increase in penetration capability. Nevertheless, even with that gun, the tank would not have been able to penetrate its own frontal armor. MAN and the 6th Department of the Armaments Department decided not to complicate matters. They took a light tank as the basis for the running gear. The engine, the gearbox, the steering mechanisms, and other units were transferred to the new vehicle from the lighter model. Initially, priority in development was given not to a new tank, but to another vehicle. It appeared in the design program on June 22, 1940. This model differed by its 180 horsepower Maybach engine and by having its side armor thickness increased to 0.8 inches. The tank was planned to be used in two versions, with a single-seat turret from the previous model, as well as with a two-seat turret designed by Daimler-Benz for a new project. The variant with a two-seat turret in the spring of 1941 was considered as a reconnaissance combat vehicle for tank regiments. In July 1941, the first experimental prototype of the new tank entered trials. Unfortunately, no details or images of this vehicle have survived. It can only be said that it did not achieve the expected performance. The contract for producing 15 tanks of the Zero series quickly faded into oblivion. The next variant, intended to develop this design further, remains almost entirely unknown. Possibly the tank was to receive a different engine and transmission. Starting from August 1, 1941, another vehicle appeared in correspondence. This tank used the power unit and transmission elements from the previous version. A boosted version of the engine, rated at 200 horsepower, was also mentioned. The requirements for maximum speed were reduced to 37 miles per hour. The armament and turret remained unchanged. A production run of 250 tanks of this type was planned. Realizing that the development of a reconnaissance tank might drag on or even reach a dead end, the Armaments Department decided to secure a backup option. On July 31, 1940, the specification for the tank was sent to the BMM and Škoda factories. The Czech firms were required to create a reconnaissance tank with a combat weight of 23,100 pounds and a maximum speed of 37 miles per hour. Each company was to produce 5 tanks. Škoda was the first to succeed, building its prototype in October 1941. BMM presented its prototype in December 1941. The first prototype from MAN appeared at the beginning of 1942. The MAN tank, which in March 1942 received the designation MAN Reconnaissance Tank, did not fit within the 23,100 pounds requirement. Its actual combat weight amounted to 26,000 pounds. For comparison, the reconnaissance vehicle from BMM had a combat weight of 25,350 pounds, while the Škoda tank turned out to be even lighter, 23,810 pounds. The creation of MAN turned out to be the longest, had the weakest engine, and in terms of speed, characteristics looked no better than its competitors. Nevertheless, the results of the joint trials, which began on March 16, 1942, were not in favor of the Czech reconnaissance tanks. On June 26th, a report was prepared recognizing the MAN reconnaissance tank as the winner. By that time, the tank had covered 1,544 miles. It was noted that the vehicle had good maneuverability, but on slippery roads there was a danger of skidding. Despite its weaker armament compared to competitors, the MAN tank was also considered the most successful in this regard. The reason was that its turret's internal space turned out to be the largest, which was very important for a reconnaissance vehicle. In addition, the MAN reconnaissance tank had the highest ground clearance and the greatest operational range. The results of the trials finally opened the way to serial production. By the end of 1941, the MAN company was working not on one but on several reconnaissance tanks at once. In the summer of the same year, the firm received an order to design a more powerful reconnaissance vehicle. It was based on a medium tank that the company was already developing. The new vehicle evolved along with the base model. After the Germans became acquainted with the Soviet T-34 in the autumn of 1941, it was decided to arrange the armor plates at more effective angles of inclination. The draft design and wooden model of the modified chassis were presented at the end of November 1941. The vehicle impressed with its level of armor protection. The thickness of the frontal armor was 3.15 inches and the side armor was 2.36 inches. By this parameter, it matched the best protected German tanks of that period. The difference was that these armor plates were placed at rational angles, which made the protection even more effective. The planned engine was a Maybach with 400 horsepower. Since the development of the basic medium tank had a higher priority, the Armaments Department decided to transfer the development of the reconnaissance vehicle to another company, MAYAG. The contract for manufacturing the turret was awarded to Daimler-Benz. The work was led by Herbert Kunze, Daimler-Benz's leading design engineer specializing in turrets. Structurally, the turret had much in common with designs for the medium tank, which in turn were heavily influenced by the turret of the Soviet T-34. It had to be radically altered compared to earlier versions, as it now needed to accommodate not only 2 crew members but also a powerful 50mm gun. This required significantly increasing the diameter of the turret ring, which also affected its shape. Like the hull, it featured rational armor slopes. The gun mount received a distinctive movable armor cover, nicknamed the pot mantlet for its shape. At MAYAG, the work was headed by a senior design engineer named Wolf. By the spring of 1942, the reconnaissance tank received a new designation. Like several other German projects, it was given an animal name. It was now called the Leopard reconnaissance tank. According to the documentation presented by MIAG in early June 1942, the Leopard's combat weight was 57,320 pounds. There was also a lighter version of the design, but Hitler rejected it, believing that even a tank of this class required thick armor. For those who might see this as yet another example of Hitler's madness, it's worth recalling the American light tank T-7. As its armor and armament were repeatedly reinforced, its weight increased from the original 28,000 pounds to nearly 55,000. A year later, the same approach was taken by the Main Armored Directorate of the Red Army regarding light tanks. In the Soviet Union, the idea reached the stage of a light tank project weighing 55,000 pounds and armed with an 85mm gun. However, it should be noted that Soviet and American military authorities demanded their engineers build light tanks, not reconnaissance vehicles. At the end of July 1942, MIAG demonstrated an improved version of the tank. Overall, its appearance remained the same as in November 1941, but there were differences. The diameter of the road wheels increased to 37.8 inches and larger idler wheels were planned. The characteristic protrusions on the front of the hull were still present, features later removed on subsequent medium tanks. MIAG continued to work on a lighter version of the Leopard. This model had frontal armor 2.4 inches thick and side armor 1.6 inches thick. However, in September 1942, Hitler finally rejected this version. According to plans, the first tanks were to enter production in April 1943, with an intended output of 20 vehicles per month by October. Meanwhile, tank crews were demanding not a well-armored, but a fast reconnaissance tank. On October 13, 1942, during a meeting attended by Hitler, a decision was made to launch production of a lighter version. Initial calculations estimated its weight at about 40,000 pounds, but it later fattened to 48,000 pounds, almost the same as the German medium tank of the 3rd series, Model L, which carried the same weapon. The Leopard reconnaissance tank was designed to be powered by a 550-horsepower Maybach engine. Its transmission included a semi-automatic gearbox and a multi-stage turning mechanism. The tank was expected to reach a top speed of 37 miles per hour on paved roads and 19 miles per hour on rough terrain. Its range was impressive, about 310 miles on roads and 186 miles off-road. The suspension design remained mostly unchanged, but later, instead of 25.6-inch wide tracks, engineers decided to use 26 by 5.9-inch ones, the same type as on the Panther tank. In the final version, the thickness of the frontal armor plates of the hull and turret was reduced to 2 inches and the sides to about 1.2 inches. At the same time, work began on self-propelled guns based on the same chassis. The first of them was a tank destroyer built on the Leopard platform. Unfortunately, aside from a brief mention, no other materials about this vehicle have survived. However, photographs of a full-scale mock-up of a self-propelled gun under the code name Device 51028 still exist. It, like the previous tank destroyer, was designed by engineers of Rheinmetall Borsig. A turret with bulletproof armor was installed on a slightly modified Leopard chassis, mounting a 105mm light howitzer. The rear part of the turret could partially unfold, making the crew's work easier. In addition, the designers abandoned the rational sloped side armor layout. More than that, the sides could fold outward, forming a large platform. The result was a light, self-propelled howitzer with full circular firing capability and high maneuverability. But on January 3, 1943, Hitler personally crossed the Leopard off the tank program. It became clear that a reconnaissance vehicle of such size was unnecessary for the Wehrmacht. Nevertheless, the Germans continued to attempt designing scout tanks based on the Panther. Contrary to the claims of some authors, development did not progress beyond mock-ups for the Leopard and its derivatives. The information about a light tank by Daimler-Benz is also completely unfounded. Most likely, someone simply misinterpreted data showing that Daimler-Benz was developing a turret for the reconnaissance tank. The development of the Leopard reconnaissance tank also influenced the project of the light reconnaissance tank Luchs. Lynx was which received its name in the spring of 1942. On July 1st, a contract was signed for the production of 800 such tanks, including 100 armed with a 20mm gun. Beginning in April 1943, a version of the Luchs with a 50mm gun was supposed to enter series production, using the same turret as the Leopard. However, not even a prototype of the Luchs with a 50mm gun was ever built. First, the heavier turret would have added several extra tons to the combat weight. Second, it blocked the hatches of the control compartment and partially restricted access to the engine bay. Finally, there was little sense in such a turret since even the 50mm gun was not powerful enough. Nevertheless, this fragment of the Leopard program did make it into production. A slightly smaller version of the turret was installed on the Armored Car Series 234/2. Interestingly, the designer Herbert Kunze, who created this turret, eventually lived to see a serial tank bearing his turret concept. He became one of the developers of the turret for the Leopard II main battle tank. When the German army adopted this reconnaissance tank, it was given an official index. The designation Panzer II F was used only on registration plates. In official correspondence, these machines were referred to as Panzerspähwagen II, which translates as Armored Reconnaissance Vehicle Type 2. Occasionally, the name Luchs, meaning lynx, was used, but more rarely. On July 1, 1942, the Aman Company signed a contract to produce 100 Luchs reconnaissance tanks armed with a 20mm gun. Initially, it was planned to later build 700 more vehicles equipped with a more powerful 50mm gun, but this idea was abandoned as early as February 1943. Theoretically, all 100 tanks were to be completed by April 1943, but in reality, production moved much slower. In September 1942, MAN delivered only one tank, in October 7, and in November and December 4 each. From January to April 1943, only 25 tanks were assembled, and none at all were produced in May. The reasons for such slow production lie in MAN's main field of work. As previously mentioned, the company was engaged in developing the medium tank that would later evolve into the famous Panther. The priority of that project was much higher, as it was not just about a reconnaissance vehicle, but a new medium tank meant to replace the PKPFW Durian-3. Preparation for Panther production, as well as the manufacturing itself, faced great difficulties. It is hardly surprising that the reconnaissance tank received attention only as a secondary task. Fully aware of the situation, the German Armaments Office decided not to overload MAN with additional work. Even later, the production rate of these reconnaissance tanks remained extremely low. Only once, in July 1943, did the monthly output exceed 10 vehicles. It is therefore not surprising that the completion of all 100 tanks stretched over more than a year. During the entire year of 1943, 77 tanks of this type were delivered, while the final 7 left the MAN factory in January 1944. There were no attempts to speed up the production of a vehicle that had taken nearly 3 years to design and was brought to life through great struggle. In fact, there was simply nowhere to manufacture it. The MIAG factory was already burdened with the PKPFW Tambor 3 program, and from February 1943, switched to assembling Stu G-40 assault guns. Moreover, in January 1944, production of Jagd Panther tank destroyers began there. Other factories were also busy producing equipment far more important to the war effort than a reconnaissance tank. Despite the tiny production series, the Luchs underwent several changes during manufacturing. From October 1942, smoke grenade launchers appeared on the turret, and they continued to be installed until the end of May 1943. Also in October, the tank received an engine heating system, an important feature for the harsh conditions of the Soviet-German front. From December 1942, the rear hatch on the turret became wider. In February 1943, periscopes for combat driving were no longer installed, though the mounting openings remained. The last major modifications date to the summer of 1943, when the steering mechanisms were changed and the number of headlights was reduced to 1. These tanks were intended for service in specialized units, tank reconnaissance companies. The organizational structure of such a company was approved on January 10, 1943. According to it, 1 Luchs was assigned to the company headquarters, while 28 were distributed among 4 platoons. The unit also included a recovery vehicle, 7 half-track tractors, and 4 light half-tracked armored personnel carriers. The main highlight of the updated tank was its power plant. It was equipped with a V-shaped 12-cylinder air-cooled engine developed by the Czech company Tatra. This engine, with a displacement of about 900 cubic inches, produced 210 horsepower. It had originally been designed for a truck, but was later adapted for use in tanks and armored vehicles. During tests that began in March 1944, the updated tank was supposed to cover about 1,860 miles. However, in May, the suspension broke down and the trials had to be halted. The same engine was also installed on German reconnaissance armored cars. As for reconnaissance tanks, the last recorded German activity in this direction took place on the territory of Czechoslovakia. The fierce desire of German companies to seize all pieces of military contracts for themselves backfired. It would have been wiser to involve Czech enterprises in the development of reconnaissance tanks, but in the summer of 1942, no one thought of that. For some time, the program for developing Czech tanks continued by inertia, although mass production of these vehicles was no longer discussed. Only in the summer of 1943 did the German command begin to suspect that something was wrong with the reconnaissance tank program. In July, the Czech company received an order to design a reconnaissance tank, and by September, full-scale mock-ups were presented. The reconnaissance vehicle was a modification of a self-propelled gun chassis. The key feature of the design was that the tanks were not built from scratch but converted from repair vehicles. By installing an engine with 160 horsepower, the maximum speed of the vehicle, which had a combat weight of about 21,000 pounds, increased to 36 miles per hour. The range was around 155 miles. In short, it was essentially the same Luchs, but simpler and cheaper. The new reconnaissance tank was developed in two versions. The main version was a reconnaissance tank equipped with a 20mm turret. It was a further development of the turret used on an armored car. This turret was universal. It was mounted on half-track reconnaissance vehicles, as well as on heavy reconnaissance armored cars. Such unification simplified tank production. Certainly, the turret's protection was lower than that of the Luchs, but the main defense of the reconnaissance tank was its speed and compact size. In terms of dimensions, the new tank even surpassed its competitor. Its height was about 7 feet, which was 4 inches lower than the Luchs. In addition, the vehicle turned out to be more than 4,400 pounds lighter. The second variant of the reconnaissance tank proved quite exotic. Instead of a rotating turret, the vehicle received a semi-open fighting compartment equipped with a 75mm short-barreled gun. It was a modified 75mm cannon adapted for reconnaissance vehicles, the same one used on self-propelled assault guns. A similar weapon was installed on armored cars, reconnaissance personnel carriers, and late production infantry support carriers. It is worth noting that the Czech factory developed two versions of the 75mm armed reconnaissance vehicle, differing in the shape of the front hull, the fighting compartment, and the gun mantelet. After reviewing the mock-ups, a decision was made to produce prototype reconnaissance tanks. 3 vehicles were built. The version with the 20mm turret was accepted into service. In February 1944, 34 reconnaissance tanks were built, or more precisely, converted from repair vehicles. And in March, another 33. Then production stopped as the Czech plant switched to manufacturing tank destroyers. There was simply no place left to produce reconnaissance tanks. The reconnaissance tanks, based on the Czech Model 38T, were sent to 2 armored reconnaissance companies, which were formed according to the updated organizational structure. In April 1944, 25 tanks were delivered to the 2nd Company of the Reconnaissance Battalion of the Grossdeutschland Division. Another 25 tanks, in September 1944, joined the 1st Reconnaissance Company of the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion of the 3rd Panzer Division. In this configuration, these reconnaissance tanks served until the end of the war. At least one vehicle became an American trophy, though it did not survive to this day. These vehicles were also spotted during the battles near Lake Balaton in Hungary. The German program to equip troops with specialized reconnaissance tanks ended in complete failure. Only 4 full-fledged reconnaissance companies with tanks of 2 types, far too few for the Army's needs.